And thank you all for coming to the Bethel Library today. My name is Ellen Jampole, and I'm the Programming and Outreach Librarian here at Bethel. And I'm very proud and honored tonight to introduce Patrick Wild, who obviously you know. But Patrick Tierney Wild is a Bethel native who has served as the town's municipal historian since 1993. He is the author of Images of America, Bethel, published in 1996, Historic Tales of Bethel, published in 2001, and last year he published Bethel, Village Among the Hills. Tonight, he's going to talk about Bethel's highways and byways, the history of the town's roads, streets, districts, and forgotten places. Welcome, Patrick Tierney Wild.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And thank you to all of you for coming out tonight. First of all, coming out despite the cold temperatures, and second of all, coming out despite the high ticket price. Now, you've been told that the tickets for tonight's presentation were $100 a piece, right? What were you told? What was the price you were given? Free. Oh, I'm ruined. I was banking on that. I heard we were going to have 80 people, and I'm doing the math. 80 times 100. I'm set. You know, I went out and I bought this new sweater. Now I'm gonna have to see if JCPenney's will take it back. I mean, it was an after Christmas sale and all, but you heard correctly. The price for tonight's presentation is absolutely nothing. And as the presentation proceeds, you'll come to realize you usually get exactly what you pay for. But up on the screen, you see the title. And this is something that I find interesting, and I hope you will too. It's basically about places that have been forgotten, or places that we all know, but we don't know the story behind them. And I want to start off tonight's program with a quote from Bethel's most famous prodigy, P.T. Barnum. When he was in town on August 19th, 1881, he had this to say: "I am desirous once more to see those places bearing the euphonious names of Toad Hole, Fenner's Rocks, Puppy Town, Wolf Pits, Chestnut Ridge, Great Hill, Wildcat, Shelter Rock, Great Pasture, Stony Hill, Beaver Brook, Plum Trees, East Swamp, and above and more than all, I am anxious to rest my eyes once more on the noble, blessed, historical Ivy Island." Now, P.T. Barnum was kind of laying it on thick. He's also trying to show off, trying to prove that he knew Bethel from being born and growing up here. He was also trying to show off his extensive vocabulary using the word euphonious. And euphonious is a word that means pleasing to the ear. So after you see this presentation tonight and you go home and you talk with your friends and your relatives and they ask you, "How was the presentation?" I want you all to say, "Oh, it was highly euphonious." And working together, we will all revive that word. Now, as we go through the presentation, it's going to be very informal. You're welcome to ask questions, just shout them out. I won't answer any of them, but if it makes you feel better, just shout them out. No, if you have questions, please feel free to ask. Before we get started, I chose this one image to start the program because I think it really shows how far we've come in terms of our roads. This dirt road you see in the picture is actually Route 302 today, very close to the entrance to St. Mary's Church and St. Mary's School. And if you look very closely, you'll see not only a car going down the street, But behind the car, there is an individual on a motorcycle as well. So you get a twofer here. Here's the motorcycle right behind the car. And this was just when roads were really changing between 1900 and 1920 because of the automobile. A lot of work had to be done to improve roads. And we'll take a look at some of those roads and what was done to them as we go through. Now, in terms of the overall program, if I could ask someone to hit that last light switch, and that will darken the back and it'll be much easier to see. The very farthest one. There you go. Great. Isn't that better? That's a lot better. Okay. All right, here's an overview of tonight's presentation and its parts. I'm going to give you a very brief summary of Bethel history. I know some of you have lived in Bethel all your life. We have other people who have just moved here recently, trying to accommodate everybody. So I'm going to give you a brief summary of Bethel history. Then we're going to talk about the methods of researching Bethel's early roads. How do you find out how old these roads are and how they came to be? Then we're going to look at Bethel's 6 school districts and forgotten places in each. Now, a lot of people don't know this. Everybody basically knows where Stony Hill is. Everybody kind of knows where the Grassy Plain area is. But some of these others, the Center District, Wildcat, you might not be as familiar. So I want to make sure everybody gets to see the story behind them. And then I'm going to wrap it up with a look at turnpikes that once ran through Bethel. Before I move on, I used as a background here a map of Connecticut from 1813. And you see that they were nice enough to include Bethel on the map, Danbury and big print Bethel shown below. And you see only 2 roads coming into Bethel. The lower road is Sunset Hill, Putnam Park Road, and Hoyts Hill, over Hoyts Hill to the Congregational Church on Main Street. And the other road is pretty much Plumtrees Road to Maple Avenue to the Congregational Church. So those roads were in existence when this map was made back in 1813. Now, to give you the basics, again, some people know this, others, this is new information. Settlers of European descent first arrived in Danbury in 1684. They came up from Norwalk. There were 8 families. They made a temporary settlement in the summer of 1684. They didn't stay the winter. They went back to Norwalk. Then they came back the following year and remained there from that point on. Settlement spread to parts of what is now Bethel by the early 1700s. We don't know specifically when, but we know there are deeds, for example, going back to 1715, where there were people who definitely owned property in what is now Bethel. Bethel was set off as a second parish of Danbury in 1759. That's when we acquired the name Bethel, meaning house of God. We became a borough of Danbury in 1847. Now, what that meant was we were given a little bit more autonomy. We kind of got to call our own shots, and that set us up for being incorporated as a separate town in 1855. But that wasn't the end of it. In 1867, we added a little territory to Bethel, and Grassy Plain was added, and we achieved the size and shape that we have today. Before I move on, I included this image. I'm sure you've seen it before, but I always find it interesting because we had an artist and writer by the name of John Warner Barber come to Bethel and make this sketch in person. And I think he did an excellent job. And the street you see in the foreground is Chestnut Street. Branching off to the right is Maple Avenue. Branching off to the left is Main Street. Right in front of you is the first Congregational Church. Now, we've had 3 of them. This one burned in 1842. The second one was hit by a tornado in 1865. That one was picked up and moved to the other side of the cemetery and is now the home of the Bethel Historical Society. The third Congregational Church is the one that is still in use today. So that kind of gives you the center of Bethel in 1834. Now, when you're trying to research Bethel's oldest roads, how do you do it? Well, this is basically the process. Original documents are usually the best source of accurate historical information. Following the destruction of land records by British forces in a military raid on Danbury on April 26, 1777, the Connecticut State Assembly decreed in January of 1778 that Danbury, which then included Bethel, must re-record their land records and road surveys. Residents were instructed to present proof of land ownership in the form of deeds they had retained. A committee would also be selected by the Danbury Board of Selectmen to make a survey of the town's roads. Now, what all that really means is that when the British attacked Danbury in 1777, they burned the building that had all the land records. Now, whereas other towns like Newtown or Ridgefield or Reading have deeds going back to the 1600s. Some towns are lucky enough to have the deeds that were signed by the Native Americans who first transferred ownership of the land to the European settlers. We don't have any of that. It all went up in flames in April of 1777. So this was a big deal. How did you prove that your land was actually your land? Also, where were the roads that were owned by Danbury? Where did they run? So you can see this is the legislation that was passed by the State Assembly. It says, whereas the public records of the town of Danbury was by the British troops burnt and destroyed, by which means the legal evidence of the titles to the lands of the inhabitants of said Danbury is entirely consumed, and in order that justice may be done to and among said inhabitants, etc., etc., etc. Then down here you see, shall make proper surveys of all the highways. That basically said, we're going to put together a committee. We're going to send them out, and they're going to find every road within Danbury. They're going to number it, and they're going to describe it. And that's what they did. This is a sample page transcription from the 1778 Danbury Road Survey. Now, if you go over to Danbury City Hall today and you ask to see Danbury Town Records Volume 1, which covers the years 1778 to 1811, and you look on pages 99 to 110, you will see a list of 190 roads that were recorded and submitted in March of 1778. When you see these records, the originals were written with a quill pen and old style script. Now, luckily for us, a gentleman by the name of Gary Boughton, who is a Bethelite, he used to be our town building inspector. He is an excellent historian, genealogist. He restores headstones. The guy is amazing. He sat down and transcribed the old quill pen writing. Now, he gave me a copy. Over the past 30 years or so, I've gone over it, and you can see some of my chicken scratch that I tried to block out as best I could on the screen. But I want to show you these last two roads in just a minute as examples of roads on the list that are in Bethel. Now, before we move on, roads were referred to as highways. Today, when we think of highway, we think of Interstate 84. Here, you'll see every single one of these descriptions starts with the word highway or contains the word highway. They're talking about just a local road. Roads were referred to as highways and were measured using linear rods. A rod is equivalent to 16.5 feet. Most roads were set at 2 rods or 33 feet wide. This indicated the total width owned by the town. The width used was often much narrower. Most roads can only be identified today by becoming familiar with early maps as well as land and census records from the time. Of the 190 roads surveyed, approximately 36 are now within the boundaries of Bethel. Now, here's how you go about deciphering the old road descriptions. This is a relatively modern map of Bethel, as you can tell. And what I'm trying to do here is take two entries from the 1778 description and lay it out for you in terms of where that would be today. So Road 106 is described in this way. Also one highway beginning at Captain Joseph Starr, running round the east side of Walnut Tree Hill to Samuel Dibble, which highway is 2 rods wide. Now, we know that Captain Joseph Starr lived right here on Walnut Hill Road. He lived at the very bottom of the steepest portion of Walnut Hill Road. In describing Road 106, they begin almost in front of his house, they run along White Road, then take a left up Rockwell Road until you again reach Walnut Hill Road. I've included a star where the house of Samuel Dibble once stood. So you see in the description, you go to Samuel Dibble. So they're talking about it's running around the side of Walnut Hill to Samuel Dibble. Now, the other road basically is taking the opposite route. It's going to the west. Also one highway beginning near Captain Joseph Starr, running around the west side of Walnut Tree Hill to the crossroad. Said highway is 2 rods wide. Now, here's Captain Joseph Starr. If you run along this way, you're on what is Shelter Rock Road until you meet this point, which they refer to as the crossroads. It's not a crossroads today, but it once was, and we're going to talk some more about that. But I did kind of hint at it by putting this dotted line. Turnpike Road begins here. Now it's a dead end, but we're going to see it originally connected with Shelter Rock Road right here at the corner of McCower Park. And so this was, in fact, a crossroads. Now, if we're looking for more proof that we have the right location, this is an 1856 map of Fairfield County. I've zoomed in on Bethel, and we were talking about Captain Joseph Starr and Samuel Dibble. By the time this map was created in 1856, the former home of Captain Joseph Starr, who lived from 1726 to 1802, was occupied by his grandson, Aschel Starr. And you can see that right here, A Starr. The home of Samuel Dibble was occupied by his son, who was also named Samuel Dibble. And you can see his house right there, that little black square. Across the street was the original Samuel Dibble's grandson, whose name was Samuel Lorenzo Dibble. You see the S.L. Dibble. That house still stands today at the corner of Rockwell and Walnut Hill Road. The crossroad that was mentioned here, you can see when it was complete. And this crossroad would exist until 1956. The truncated portion is now called Turnpike Road. Now, again, to kind of give you a better idea of where we're talking about, up in the top right-hand corner, I've included a photograph from Google Maps of Captain Joseph Starr. That house is located at 40 Walnut Hill Road. And below it, you'll see this advertisement that appeared in the Danbury paper called the Farmer's Journal way back in 1791, where he was letting his fellow farmers know that he was going to hold a meeting at his house. So all of this evidence put together helps to verify that in looking for these roads, we have the right location. Now, moving on. When you're looking at Bethel, it's a big place, relatively speaking. And so you need to break it down into smaller parts and make it more manageable. The best way to do that is to use our old school districts. We had 6 of them, and you see them all listed here. These 6 school districts were consolidated into one in 1888. One of them changed its name. The Wildcat District, by 1870, that was considered to be too uncivilized. We needed something that sounded a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more refined. So that district was changed to the Elmwood District. Now, just to point them out to you as best I can, this is Stony Hill up here. This is Plum Trees. This is Wildcat. This is Wolf Pits. This was simply called the Center District. And over here to the west, we have the Grassy Plain District. And we're going to talk some more because this map changes when we add another portion of Grassy Plain in 1867. It's interesting that this map was created in 1867. Before that year ended, the size of our town had increased. All right. Now, I really want you to take a good look at this. You are looking at the earliest known map of downtown Bethel, and it comes from 1851. This is part of a much larger wall map that depicts downtown Danbury, and in the bottom right-hand corner, it has the borough of Bethel. Now, before I get into the details, what always cracks me up about this map is that they spelt our name wrong up here. All right. They added an extra L. Now, I don't know whether they were trying to make a negative commentary about our town. If you look at the last 4 letters of Bethel, were they trying to say something about us? I hope not. But this is the earliest map you're going to find. I've been looking for years. I can't find one any earlier than this. And what's interesting to me is that this was done at a crucial point in our town's history, because when they were making this map, they were actually in the process of building the Danbury-Norwalk Railroad. And so what they show you here is speculative. It was not complete. They're saying, well, this is where it's going to go when it's finished. And they got something wrong. They included a depot, but they put it on the wrong side of the tracks. Because when we did build the depot, we put it on the other side of the tracks. You can see here, it's misplaced, all right? But you'll see a lot of roads that are unfamiliar to us. Right here, Center Street. And for a while, we tried to be fancy and spell it the English way, R-E rather than E-R, but that was later phased out. But some of these roads, you know, if somebody stops you and says, hey, could you tell me where Liberty Street in Bethel is? There is no Liberty Street. If you could tell me where Cross Street is, or Elm Street, or East Street, none of these roads exist any longer. They have all changed in one way or another. But this is a very detailed map. I only wish it went a little further west, because it basically stops at the railroad tracks and doesn't include much more. But what it does show, it shows in a very detailed way. Now, I didn't want to mark up that map so I can show it to you in its purest form, but the next version of it, I did mark it up so I could give you more information. Now, first of all, you look at the red lines and you say, what the heck is that? What I'm trying to show you here are the oldest colonial roads through Bethel. When that survey was done in 1778, these roads were already in existence. The rest were not. They had not yet been created. And they had different names than they do today. For example, the road that came up Putnam Park Road over Hoyt's Hill down onto what is now Greenwood Avenue, that was simply called the Fairfield Road because it brought you in from Fairfield. Maple Avenue, even though it's listed as Maple Avenue here, there are other maps that list it as North Street. And in a lot of old records, it's referred to as the North Road. It brought you in from places like Farmington and Hartford. This is South Street down here. But this part of South Street existed in 1851. This part of South Street was put in 1847. And the primary reason for the creation of South Street was to access the Center Cemetery that was created at the same time. Rector Street was also part of that project as well. What I have labeled here as Great Hill Road, that is today Taylor Avenue, but then Taylor Avenue connecting to Nashville Road Extension and going all the way up to Chestnut Ridge. So putting those two things together, Taylor Avenue, Nashville Road Extension, that was known as the Great Hill. When you think about it, when you're down on South Street and you're going to Chestnut Ridge, that is a great hill that you have to go up. Chestnut Ridge was already Chestnut Ridge. Beaver Street, no longer with us. Today, it's Nashville Road. We're going to see that road has actually had 3 different names during its lifetime. But Liberty Street, now Milwaukee Avenue, what was then called Cross Street is now Oxford Street. You might say, well, what about the rest of Greenwood Avenue? This is kind of a fuzzy topic in a lot of the records because it's often referred to as a pathway or a reserved highway. It was there, it seems, but it really wasn't used that much. And part of the reason was it was all swamp. Where today you have the Dolan Plaza, that was all underwater. And I have found articles written in the 1880s where an older gentleman from Bethel said, I used to go swimming there when I was a kid. And that included also the area where Grand Street is today. It was very, very swampy, and the swamp wrapped around to where the municipal center is today. That was all swampy as well. While I'm here, I also wanted to point out to you that downtown Bethel at that point in time had 2 different schoolhouses. One here on Chestnut Ridge, and then one here on what is today Greenwood Avenue, kind of across the street from where Caroluzzi's Market is today. I also snuck in on this map in 1851, they have this residence that is marked I. Barnum, and that was for Irena Barnum. That was P.T. Barnum's mother. She lived at that location until her death in 1868. So when they came along and made that map, P.T. Barnum's mother was still alive and well and living in the old homestead. All right, that's the center of Bethel. But if we come back 5 years later in 1856, this is the same basic part of Bethel, but it's a little bit more crowded and it covers a little bit more area. This one shows what's on the other side of the railroad tracks to some degree. And what I have done for you is I have either given you the old name for a particular location, or I've given you the modern name just to clarify where we're talking about. Starting from left to right, this is the area in between Parloa Park and Beach Street. That's Beach Street up in the top left-hand corner. That area was known as Toad Hole. What we call Blackman Avenue was then referred to as the Lane, and later it was known as the Old Lane. This area in general was known as Old Town Place. This was the earliest settled portion of downtown Bethel. So in other words, when you say, where did Bethel start? Well, in terms of the downtown area, this is where it began. And you might say, well, that's kind of a weird location. Well, all the action was here until 1760, when land was donated for the Congregational Church right here by a man named Ebenezer Hickok. Once the church was situated there, all of the commercial aspect, all of the residential aspect switched from Blackman Avenue to Main Street. And this kind of became a quiet part of town. I put these little blue hexagons on here to show you where some of the earliest houses were. You'll notice one of the homes is labeled J. Greenwood. That stands for John Greenwood. His last name should ring a bell, and we will talk some more about him. Down at the bottom, again, you see what today we call Taylor Avenue. Before that, it was Railroad Avenue. Before that, it was Great Hill Road. Now, this is Taylor Avenue here. This is Nashville Road, which was then called Beaver Street. In between those two roads, you had this huge rock formation. Today, the most northern part of it makes up Overlook Park. Any of you have been inside Overlook Park, you know there are a lot of huge rocks there, boulders. In the 1800s, that area was known as Fenner's Rock. And if you look over here, you'll see two houses, R. Fenner and H. Fenner. That's for Riley Fenner and Hiram Fenner. They own that land. Long before it was made a public park, the people of Bethel would go to that part of town to have their picnics. There weren't any trees. And when you went up to the top, and this is how Overlook Park gets its name, obviously, you could see all of downtown Bethel. But, you know, again, you ask somebody today, can you tell me how to get to Fenner's Rocks? They're not going to know, but now you will know, and you can tell your friends and relatives. All right, this was the street I was telling you about that had three names over time. First, it was called Simpog Hill Road. Then it was called Beaver Street. And believe it or not, it was Beaver Street up until the 1930s. It wasn't changed till Nashville Road until that point in time. We have a stream coming down off of Nashville Road and heading through the downtown area. That stream or brook was known as Waterhorse Brook. And I don't have to tell you what you were expected to do when you came to that brook. All right, it had a purpose. You would water your horse at Waterhorse Brook. Over here, Milwaukee Street, that was not on the last map. Remember, it was Liberty Street. Now it is Milwaukee Street, and then it became Milwaukee Avenue. But this is a low area in between what is today Greenwood Avenue and Milwaukee Avenue. It's this very low spot that was referred to in the old days as Sandy Hollow. That's another name that's gone by the wayside. Up at the top, remember I told you that Maple Avenue would take you to points north? On this map, it's referred to as North Street. Some of these streets had their names changed because Danbury had streets with the exact same name. Now, there's Main Street Bethel, but Bethel was still part of Danbury. So you were talking about Main Street, people would have to ask you, do you mean the Main Street in downtown Danbury, or do you mean the Main Street in the Bethel part of Danbury? They had a South Street, we had a South Street. They had a North Street, we had a North Street. You can see the confusion, and so changes needed to be made. Here's one thing I wanted to point out to you. This map shows Prospect Street, and I have noted that was created between 1851 and 1856. How do I know that? Let's go back. Here's 1851. No Prospect Street. Come back 5 years later. There it is. It's been put through. So you see, any idiot can be town historian, all right? As if you need further proof. But I just love looking at these maps. It's almost like the more you look at them, the more you find. Now, before we move on, remember I was hinting at the name John Greenwood up there in the top left-hand corner. Greenwood Avenue originally only extended from the railroad tracks of the Danbury-Norwalk Railway all the way out to Grassy Plain Street, down to basically where the Sycamore Restaurant is today. Once you came towards town and you crossed over the track, now you were on Center Street. Center Street only extended as far as the Sidco station, or where Caroluzzi's Wine and Liquor Store is today. Then it became Elm Street. Elm Street acquired its name for a large elm tree that grew in the front of P.T. Barnum's birthplace. Then when you got to the bottom of Hoyt's Hill, the road once again changed its name to East Street. Well, that was confusing for a lot of people because they said, it's all the same thing. It's all our main drag. We need to fix that. Well, in 1934, we did. And this is the story of the birth of Greenwood Avenue as we know it. On October 18th, 1934, the Bethel Board of Selectmen voted to combine 4 streets into one. Greenwood Avenue had formerly run from the Danbury-Norwalk crossing west to the intersection with Grassy Plain Street. The street derives its name, it should say, from the fact that it ran past the home and property of John Greenwood Jr. and was originally referred to as Greenwoods Avenue. It was now extended to include what had been Center Street, Elm Street, and East Street. The change took effect in 1935. Greenwood served as the manager of P.T. Barnum's American Museum and was later appointed by President Ulysses S. Grant to serve as U.S. Consul to Germany. He was also one of Mark Twain's Innocents Abroad in 1867. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Twain's works. In 1869, he published a book called Innocents Abroad, or The Modern Pilgrim's Progress. He was telling the story of a trip he made to Europe and the Holy Land in 1867. It was basically a travel log. It was a tremendous hit. In fact, I read that this was Twain's best-selling book during his lifetime. It wasn't until after his death that Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer became more popular. What I'm getting at is that when Mark Twain went on that extensive trip, he was, part of a tour group. On that tour group was John Greenwood Jr. He was one of Twain's companions. That is John Greenwood Jr., the man for whom our main thoroughfare is named. And this is a picture that was taken in 1862. I've placed above it an advertisement for Barnum's Museum down in New York City. And you see up at the top, it says Phineas T. Barnum was the proprietor, but John Greenwood Jr. was the manager. He later became Barnum's overall manager. He managed all of Barnum's financial dealings, and Barnum said he was always honest to the penny. So I think that's high praise for John Greenwood. He died while serving as U.S. Consul to Germany. His body was shipped back to the United States. He is buried in the Center Cemetery over on South Street. During his lifetime, he had 2 wives. When you go to the cemetery, John Greenwood is in the center. His first wife is to the left. His second wife is to the right, and all 3 of them have matching headstones. But this highlighted area lets us know that when the Board of Selectmen were taking this action to combine the road, they said, should we change the name? And for a while, they thought of renaming it Main Street because it is our main street. And then they also considered calling it Barnum Avenue. But those 2 ideas were shot down, and it obtained the name Greenwood Avenue. Now, we're moving on to other districts. We've been looking at the Center District, and basically we've been really concentrating on the green area right here. But if you lived within the Center School District, it wasn't just the green area, it was all of this mustard area. So all of the land to the north of it and to the south of it, within these dotted lines, that was the Center School district. And the schools were located downtown. If you lived out here, you had to walk to school and walk back unless you could hitch a ride. You were responsible for your own transportation in these times. And all of these schoolhouses, at least at first, were one-room schoolhouses. Here you get a good shot of the Grassy Plain district in its original form. Now, Bethel kind of broke from Danbury twice. 1759, we became a separate parish. 1855, we became a separate town, but we retained the same boundaries. And if you look at Grassy Plain, what they did for most of the boundary is they took Simpog Brook, and they basically said one side of the brook will be Danbury, one side of the brook will be Bethel. But now, in 1867, Bethel decided to pick up a little more territory. And in the map that I created on the right, the red line shows the original boundary. The blue line shows the additional territory that was added in 1867. Now you might say, why? What was this all about? All right, you're going to hear the true story. The part of Grassy Plain that was annexed in 1867 is outlined in blue. We didn't take all of it. This part eventually would be left behind and be absorbed by Danbury's Long Ridge School District. But why did we pick up that territory? Here's the story. The sale of alcohol was the reason for the annexation of Grassy Plain. Danbury was a wet town, meaning they allowed alcohol to be sold. Bethel was a dry town. We didn't. Danburyans from Grassy Plain would wander into Bethel while under the influence and cause problems, and some serious problems. Bethel sought to annex Grassy Plain to shut down the grog shops, and that's the way they were described in the old news articles that were located there. In 1867, an act of the state legislature approved the annexation. Now, over on the right-hand side, I'm showing you this 1867 map. The previous map was one designed to show Bethel. This is a separate map designed to show Danbury. So where the other one left off, this one picks up. Couple of forgotten places. If you were to go to the Dunkin' Donuts on Grassy Plain Street, and you have the Dunkin' Donuts, you have the Indian restaurant, you have the Japanese restaurant, then you have a side parking lot. You know where I'm talking about? Billy, I know you know the neighborhood. If you walk all the way to the edge of the parking lot, there's a retaining wall. If you look over that retaining wall, you'll see a stream running by. That is Muddy Brook. All right, that is the true name of that stream. Heading towards it, you have Simpog Brook. On this map, it's called Umpog Creek. Simpog was a name they could never get right. Every map you see spells it in a different way. There was even a time when it was written as Sevenpog Brook. But that's Simpog running north. And that's another weird thing. Most rivers and streams run south. Most of the rivers and streams in our area run north. They are running towards the Housatonic. And once they reach the Housatonic, then they run south. But these are heading towards the Still River first, and then the Still River hooks up with Beaver Brook and then makes its way eventually to Housatonic. I'm talking about over here how Grassy Plain was absorbed. Simpog, most people don't know, is a word meaning beaver in Quiripi, which is an Algonquin language formerly spoken by the indigenous people of southwestern Connecticut. And another place where you can see Simpog Brook, if you're driving on South Street and you come to Parloa Field, the outfield has that retaining wall and wire fence. Behind that fence, that's Simpog Brook that's running by. All right, now we're going to take a look at the Stony Hill district for anybody who flew in from Stony Hill tonight to be with us. What's hard to believe is that Hawleyville Road was once the heart of Stony Hill. Another thing that's hard to believe is that prior to the Civil War, nearly all the families living in Stony Hill were related in one way or another. Now, take a look at Stony Hill. Every one of those little black squares indicates a house, and above it, you see the name of the person who lived in that house. Can you imagine trying to do that today for Stony Hill and squeeze in all the names of the people who live there? I don't think it could be done. But I'm trying to identify for you some familiar places and some places that are probably unknown to you. Hawleyville Road branches off of what we call Route 6 right here. You move along Hawleyville Road until you come to Old Hawleyville. Then you have to take a jog to the north. And then there's a second part of Hawleyville that will take you eventually to the Hawleyville section of Newtown. And that's how it acquired its name. This is Vale Road. Right at the intersection of Vale Road and Hawleyville, that was considered to be the heart of Stony Hill in the early days. That's where they chose to build a schoolhouse, because you built the school where the people were, where the greatest collection of houses could be found. Over here, this Zigzag Road, this is Benedict Road. This relatively straight road, that's Payne Road. All of the area in between those two roads was owned by the Benedict family. And in the old deeds, they refer to it as the middle piece, the piece in the middle between Payne and Benedict. When Bethel was set off as a separate parish from Danbury in 1759, they laid out the boundaries and described them. Payne Road was in existence and in use in 1759. I don't think they've widened it since then. But a lot of people have traveled that road. And what we call Route 6, in 1759, they were already calling the old Woodbury Road, because it was that old. It had been in use since earliest times. And believe it or not, in the 1700s, Woodbury had a bigger population than Danbury. That's hard to believe, but you could look that up. All right, a swampy area that is right on the Bethel-Danbury line is called East Swamp. That's down by McCower Park on the road that will take you past the Danbury sewage treatment plant. That's East Swamp. We talked about Turnpike Road. In earlier times, it was called Jabez Hill. This is an interesting one. On the corner of Old Hawleyville Road, all right, this is Old Hawleyville Road, and Walnut Hill Road was again a swampy area that was called Cranberry Bogs. And it obtained its name because cranberries were grown in those bogs. I found evidence of a lawsuit that took place between two families in Stony Hill. They were even related to one another, the Weeds and the Dibbles, but they were fighting over who owned parts of the cranberry bogs. Again, you see what is today. This line right here is today's Route 6, and I've laid out for you where the Big Y shopping center is today. Over here, I've circled the location of one of Stony Hill's oldest houses. It was the John Dibble house. It was built in 1743. And I know that for a fact because over in the Danbury Museum and Historical Society, they have a diary kept by a man in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s. His wife was connected with the Dibbles. In his diary, he talks about a trip that he made to Stony Hill in 1855 and visited this house. And he said, carved right in the center of the oak mantle was the date 1743. pointing out the year the house was made. Now, unfortunately, that house no longer exists, but if you want to know the location, when it burned, another house was put in its place. That house today stands right next to the entrance of the Walnut Hill Community Church. It's been renovated and modernized, but that was the location of this John Dibble house. The Dibble family also donated the land for the Stony Hill Cemetery right here. And I think they picked this location intentionally because it's pretty much on the line between plum trees and Stony Hill and could be used by people who lived in both districts. And the Dibbles, as you can see, there are Dibbles on both sides of the line. Here's a Dibble up here in Stony Hill. Here's a Dibble down here in plum trees.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, absolutely.
So if you come off Hollyville Road and you get to Old Hollyville, that street that's going east, does that still exist?
Are you talking about this one up here?
So-
Yes, it still exists. And it was abandoned completely for probably almost 100 years. And then less than 20 years ago, a few new houses were built on the portion of the road closest to Old Hollyville Road. The town said, well, we've already got one Hollyville Road. What do we call this? If you drive by the end of it, the street sign says Hollyville Road number 2. But it's a dead end. It originally took you all the way to basically exit 9 in Hollyville. There were 2 roads you can see right here. The one at the top was the oldest. And in 1847, they came along and they built a shortcut. But now both of them are cut off before you reach the next road in Newtown, which is Secor Road. The Stony Hill Cemetery, which is right on the edge of the Chimney Heights housing development, that goes all the way back to 1793. Now, when Bethel broke from Danbury, and again, we kind of broke twice, once as a parish, once as a town, we took Stony Hill, but we didn't take all of it. We left behind a little piece. And let me just read this so I give you the straight dope. Stony Hill is mentioned in land records before Bethel was set off as a separate parish or had its own school districts, with the earliest known record of the name found in a probate record from 1742. When Bethel became a town in 1855, most of Stony Hill came with it, but one part was left behind. This 1867 map shows Danbury's part of Stony Hill. The red star indicates the location of the present-day Interstate 84 entrance ramp near exit 8, and the yellow star right here indicates where US Route 6 crosses Beaver Brook close to the entrance of the Danbury Walmart. This area was traditionally known as Long Bridge, owing to the width of the brook at this point. So it took a long bridge to cross that wide brook, again, very close to the entrance of the Danbury Walmart. You can see on this map that they were using Beaver Brook, not the district, but the actual body of water as the dividing line. So here is the Beaver Brook, and on one side was Stony Hill, the other side was the Beaver Brook School District. But when we broke away, those people were kind of in limbo. All right, are we in the Stony Hill of Bethel? Are we in the Stony Hill of Danbury? Where do we send our kids to school? It was very confusing for quite a while. Now, part of the title of this presentation was Forgotten Places. I want to spend just a couple of minutes on a forgotten road in Stony Hill that was originally known as Jenkins Ridge. Now, what I'm showing you here is a 1922 Price and Lee map that shows Jenkins Ridge Road, then known as Chimney Road. The road was named for Jakin Benedict, who once lived near the northeast corner of Payne Road and Route 6. Now, to get you straight, here's Route 6, here's Payne Road. This is where Jakin Benedict originally lived. After he died, his house was moved to a location behind his son's home at the corner of Route 6 and Benedict Road, right here. That's where the Microtel is today. Everybody know where I'm talking about? Corner of Benedict and Route 6. But when they moved the house, it's post and beam. Post and beam houses can be disassembled and put back together again relatively easily, at least the framework. It's kind of like Lincoln logs. Have you ever played with Lincoln logs when you were a kid? You could put them back together again. When they moved this house, they didn't take the foundation and they didn't take the central stone chimney. So it stood there for years and years by itself. And the name Jenkins Ridge Road was lost and it came to be known as Chimney Road. This road then provided the inspiration for the name Chimney Heights when that housing development came along in the 1960s. But here you see the route of Jenkins Ridge Road. It starts out on Payne Road and then it snakes its way to Benedict Road. Now, when Chimney Heights was put in, they did keep a part of it. They kept the upper portion, which they call Chimney Road, but the part that connected with Payne Road no longer exists. This map, the larger map, 1922. This map here, the smaller inset, is from 1960, and you can see it is actually, I'll blow it up for you. You can see that they actually label it Chimney Road. It's the exact same road right here that was Jenkins Ridge Road. But most people don't know that. Now, as far as Jakin goes, Jakin Benedict lived from 1727 to 1785. He was born in Grassy Plain, but lived most of his life in Stony Hill. He was first buried in the South Street Cemetery in Danbury. But in 1947, graves were transferred to the Worcester Street Cemetery in order to build the South Street School. So poor Jakin Benedict, his final resting place was not really his final resting place. He's had two. This is Jakin Benedict's signature on his last will and testament when he died, or just before he died in 1785, and his headstone is in the Worcester Street Cemetery in Danbury after it was moved, and I'll just blow that up for you. And this photograph was also taken by Gary Boughton. I told you that he is a great historian and is also an expert on gravestone restoration. So that's the person for whom Jenkins Ridge Road was named. He really did exist. And that's what you find when you research so many of these roads. They have a crazy name today. Nobody knows where the name came from. But if you do a little research, you say, hey, there was a reason for that name. These people really did exist. All right, here's an image I'm hoping you're going to like. This is a 1935 aerial view of part of Stony Hill. And I have put a lot of different things on here to try and help identify just where it is. I'm not a great highlighter, but I tried to highlight for you in blue the original colonial road that ran through Stony Hill. And you can see these old roads really had what we would call a serpentine route. They wandered all over the place. Very few of them were ever straight. And notice that again, when you got to the top of the hill that you travel on as you pass today's Target department store, with the store being on your right-hand side, when you got to the top of that hill, you then turned on to Hawleyville Road. This was the heart of Stony Hill. The part we travel on today did not exist until about 1815. It was put through basically as a shortcut. And one of the ways you can tell an old road from a newer road, again, look at that newer road, much straighter than the one it was replacing. And this shortcut would continue right on across the line into Newtown. You would go past where the big Y is now, travel on until on the right-hand side on Route 6, you pass a road that is called Old Bethel Road. That's Newtown's name for what we call Walnut Hill Road. When Walnut Hill Road hits the Newtown line, it changes its name to the old Bethel Road. Well, that shortcut went from the end of Benedict Road. Here's the end of Benedict Road. The shortcut went from here to Old Bethel Road in Newtown. And now this part of the route was pretty much on the way down. Not as many people knew it or would use it. Now, what I'm trying to show you here in white is what was done in 1914. Remember I told you at the beginning when I showed you that first postcard image of the car going down the road that between 1910 and 1920 was when road building in America really took off because more and more people were purchasing automobiles. Well, in the summer of 1914, they said, we're going to improve first the road from Danbury to Newtown, where the flagpole is. And then as the second part of that project, we're going to improve the road from Newtown down to Bridgeport. Well, the first part was originally known as the Danbury-Newtown State Trunk Line. It is shown in white. Now, what I want you to realize is I did not color it in white. It appears that way in the photograph because this road was made entirely of poured concrete, the entire length of it. And it's still there underneath the asphalt road that we travel today. And what they were trying to do is iron out all of the twists and turns that were in this old blue road. Here is an obvious example. Can you see what they did here? These two parts are parallel, but the white concrete road is a straighter route than the old blue road. But it's an interesting thing. And to me, I read the newspaper articles from the time that they were able to do that, to create that road from Main Street in Danbury to the flagpole in Newtown, all in the course of one summer. That's a lot of work. Kind of amazing. Now, in 1961, Interstate 84 is built. And it was originally called the Yankee Expressway, which I think is a much nicer name than just I-84. But they had to make more changes as a result of this interstate coming through. Now, this big white dotted line, that's supposed to be Interstate 84 that I have put here. And this red star shows you where you enter 84 from this area. But here's an interesting thing that they did. Here's the old blue road. Here's the improved road from 1914. When they built 84, they said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to extend the old colonial road and make it the entrance ramp. But to kind of deal with all of the traffic, we'll make this old colonial road one way that heads west, and we'll take the improved road from 1914 and we'll make that one way heading east. So they used both of the old roads to help accommodate the new interstate highway. So there was a lot going on up in Stony Hill during this time period. And this was before the population boom that happened in the 1960s and 70s. Moving on to a different school district, the Wolf Pits District. And Wolf Pits is another name that has been spelled a variety of ways. Sometimes the wolf and pits are combined into one word. Sometimes there's only one T. Here on the map, you see it has two T's. Sometimes it has an S on the end. Sometimes it doesn't. But this was the Wolf Pits School District, which bordered Reading. There are a lot of names here that are no longer in use. We had a place called Fulling Mill Ridge. A fulling mill was a place where you could take old cloth, fabric, rags. It would be ground up using water, and then the remains could be then basically recycled and made into new cloth. There was just such a mill in that part of Wolf Pits. There was a bridge called Old Maid's Bridge, and I'll show you a picture of that in just a minute. To help identify where we are, that's Wolf Pits Road. And below it, you see Wolf Pit Cemetery. Many of these districts, to really set them off as a district, had both a school and a cemetery, and Wolf Pits adhered to that rule. The school was right here, the cemetery was just down the road. Today, everybody is familiar with Sunset Hill Road that comes up from Reading. A lot of people don't know it was formerly called Couches Hill Road. And that was really in use until about 1900. And then wealthy individuals from New York began buying up property along that road and building big estates. They didn't think Couches Hill sounded appealing. And so they started an effort, hey, let's call it Sunset Hill Road. There weren't as many trees. If you look at photographs of Bethel around the turn of the century, 1900, almost no trees, which today kind of shocks us. But at that point in time, it provided you with some tremendous view. So if you were up there on the top of Sunset Hill Road, you did get to see some beautiful sunsets. So you can kind of figure where they got that name. The bottom right-hand corner, you see Bogus Woods. This was a wooded area that some people didn't consider to be big enough to be officially called the woods. Oh, that's a bogus woods. That's too small. Here's one of the places P.T. Barnum mentioned in that quote that I showed you at the beginning, Puppy Town. Now today, when you hear the word puppy, you think of a cute little dog. But what you have to remember is pup can also apply to wolves as well. And I believe Puppy Town in Wolf Pit District related to the fact that there were wolf dens in that part of the district where the wolf pups were raised, because this is an ancient name. Some sources I saw said that Puppy Town was a name that existed before Wolf Pits even existed. So some of these go way back. I have included here, this is a statue by the famous sculptress Alice Hyatt Huntington that shows wolves, and that's in the Collis P. Huntington State Park today. All right. Yes, you may. Yes? This one right here?
Yes.
No, that is the Wolf Pit Cemetery on Sunset Hill Road. Yes. And that one goes back to 1825. That was the earliest burial in that cemetery. Now, in terms of how did Wolf Pits get its name? This is an article I found in the Newtown Bee from 1897. They were quoting a Bethelite who lived from 1808 to 1872. His name was Levi Taylor, and this is what he had to say. The origin of the name of this locality is said came from the fact that the first settlers dug large pits for a wolf trap. The sides of the pit were dug under so that an animal could jump in but could not jump out. These pits were baited with a live lamb from the flock of sheep that every farmer kept to clothe and feed his family. And the part that I just quoted is shown here in the original article with a highlighter. And this is the type of animal that would have been hanging around in the Wolf Pits district during this time period. A little scary. I want to show you another place in Wolf Pits, a forgotten spot in Wolf Pits. This is Old Maid's Bridge, this little crossing right here. It's near 56 Wolf Pits Road. Maybe some of you live near that spot. The name for this bridge may have stemmed from the fact that it was probably so rickety that some were hesitant to trust it. And those who refused to take the risk were derisively called old maids. All right. But I don't blame them. I've seen on Google Maps, they have earlier photos of the same spot, and those two side rails on the bridge have recently been replaced. But prior to that, it looked pretty scary. And I'm imagining what it looked like in the 1700s. They didn't have a lot of public works projects in the 1700s. It was just people who lived in the area. Hey, let's get together next Saturday. We'll cut down some trees and we'll try to make a bridge across this little stream. And that's the way it went. Things began to change once we were organized under the federal government beginning in 1789. Money started coming to the states from the federal government and things improved. But prior to that, it was pretty much every state and every town was on their own. All right, now we're in the Plum Trees District. Take a look at the map. Some of these places I'm hoping you have never heard of before. Now, to kind of give you an idea where we are, this purple triangle, that is where the Plum Trees one-room schoolhouse is today, the one that we're familiar with. However, that's actually the third Plum Tree School. On this map, and this was done in 1867, the school at that point in time was directly across the street on Plum Trees Road. This map was being drawn while the current Plum Tree School was actually being built. It was built in 1867. There had been one even earlier than that over on Walnut Hill Road. Now this is kind of confusing because this is Plum Trees Road. There used to be two bridges that crossed the stream that's at the bottom of Whittlesey. Today, you come across here, only one bridge, then you hang a left and go on to Walnut Hill Road. But at this point in time, there were two different bridges. You took one if you wanted to go to Plum Trees. You took one if you wanted to say, let's go up to Stony Hill. Well, a little bit down that road on the left-hand side was the location of the very first Plum Tree Schoolhouse. The hill that today is on Taylor Road and will lead you up to where the current Plum Tree Schoolhouse is, that was always referred to as Schoolhouse Hill. And I found articles about kids going sledding in the wintertime down Schoolhouse Hill. Now, earlier in the presentation, we looked at Walnut Hill Road. Right alongside it is Hoyts Road that will take you from Walnut Hill over to Rockwell Road. Well, prior to, let's say, 1850, it was known as Aunt Naomi's Road. And it was named for a woman named Naomi Beebe. Her husband, Captain Ethel Beebe, had died at a very young age and left her alone to raise her children in the only house that existed on that road. After she died, the house sat empty for years and years, but people did not forget the name. They always referred to it as Aunt Naomi's Road. Now, again, ask somebody today in Bethel, hey, where's Aunt Naomi's Road? Nobody will be able to help you, but you can help them now. All right, over here, everybody knows this spot. This is the four-way intersection. You have just come by Blue Jay Orchards. Where you see E. Weiss on this map, that's basically where the store for Blue Jay Orchards is today. So this is Plum Trees. This is Old Hawleyville Road. Nearby was a house owned by a man named Burr Edmonds. And everybody knew him, everybody liked him. And so for a time, this intersection was referred to as Edmonds Corners. And it was used quite often in the newspapers. Again, it's a name that's been lost to us. This area right here, remember we talked earlier about cranberry bogs, that was in Stony Hill. This was long bogs in Plum Trees. And again, Plum Trees Road, Old Hawleyville Road, this is Shelley Road running diagonally through Long Bogs. Now, Shelley Road no longer connects. There's a part of it down here, but this was the Long Bogs district. And Long Bogs was sometimes spelled with two G's, and a bog is defined as a wet, spongy ground, especially a poorly drained, acidic area rich in accumulated plant material that eventually forms peat. But again, kind of an interesting name, but one that has just about been completely forgotten. All right, now we're going on to Wildcat District. The name was changed to Elmwood in 1870. This has got some weird names, but first I want to show you, there is a cemetery in Elmwood. It was established in 1845, and it's still there along Route 302. Wildcat that I know of had two different schoolhouses. One was actually located on Codfish Hill Road back in the 1700s. And the second one was located on Route 302, close to the corner of Rockwell Road and Route 302 today. Now, how did Wildcat District get its name? Same way that Wolf Pits did. There were wildcats or bobcats that lived in this area. Here's a weird name, Nascro. It pops up in lots and lots of deeds and records. Nascro was the name of an Indian chief who lived in Reading. And he was not really a full chief. He was what was referred to as an under chief or an assistant chief. He was kind of like the vice president of the tribe, let's say. When Reading was purchased, remember I said that when the British burned our records, we lost any evidence of how land deals were negotiated with the Native Americans. Well, Reading still has theirs. They were negotiating with a chief who was known as Chickens or Chicken Warups. There was an Indian name that the English tried to translate, and the best they could do was come up with the word Chickens. Chickens was the top chief. Nascro was the assistant chief. Well, he seems to have owned a good deal of land on both sides of the Bethel-Reading border. So this lower portion of the Wildcat District was known as Nascro. Bear with me for a minute. If you're on Route 302 and you're heading towards Newtown, you pass here the end of Rockwell Road, then you pass the end of Old Hawleyville Road. You come to a point where now Codfish Hill Road will appear on the right-hand side. Is everybody with me? Everybody know where I am? All right. Today, you take a route that is relatively straight, but as you travel down that road, and think about this in your mind's eye, it's pretty much swamp on the left side and swamp on the right side. The roadway has been mounded up to make its way through that swamp. Well, that was Nascro Swamp. That road that we travel on today was put in around 1809. Prior to that, when you got to this point near the end of Old Hawleyville Road, you then had to turn on to Codfish Hill Road. And at that point in time, it was known as Wildcat Ridge. You got to this point right here, and then you turned down Jacqueline Road, and you came out basically where the Dodgingtown Firehouse is today. Everybody with me? And what you're trying to do is you're trying to avoid all of that swamp, because to build a road through that swamp was a considerable project, and it didn't take place until 1809. Codfish Hill Road, just quickly, it's one of those roads that drives me crazy because this part is called Codfish Hill Road. This part is called Codfish Hill Road. This part is called Codfish Hill Road. And this part here is called Codfish Hill Extension. You have 4 roads basically that are all kind of sharing the same name. All right. Now, I wanted to hit you with a lot of different places at one shot here, and I hope you can see this. P.T. Barnum at the beginning in that quote made a point of mentioning Ivy Island. Ivy Island is located behind McCower Park and the Bennett property, right on the Bethel-Danbury line. And on this map, it would be this spot right here. Why did P.T. love this island so much? Well, here's the story. Barnum used this 10-acre piece of swamp as collateral when purchasing Scudder's American Museum in New York City in 1841. The land had been given to him on his 2nd birthday by his maternal grandfather, Phineas Taylor, the man he was named for. That's what the PT in P.T. Barnum stands for, Phineas Taylor. The dirt road off of Walnut Hill Road that still leads to this location was sometimes called Ivy Lane. Today, the upper half of this piece is owned by the Eversource Utility Company, and the lower half is owned by the Bethel Land Trust. Top right-hand corner, this is the original deed, still on file at the Danbury City Hall for Ivy Island. And his grandfather was thinking, P.T. Barnum's birthday was July 5th. His father had this, or I'm sorry, his grandfather had this deed drawn up on June 25th so that he would have it in time to present to his son on his second birthday. Now, just to go back, some of these other names, and I'll run through them quickly.
Can I ask you something?
Yes, go right ahead.
Who, is that island still in existence today, or who owns the island now?
Again, the island is owned jointly by Eversource and the Bethel Land Trust.
I know how you get to that
Mhm.
substation there.
Right. So the substation is actually on Ivy Island.
Oh,
And the area above that is the area, the lower half is the Bethel Land Trust and the Eversource part. It's a weird situation. Ivy Island is not always an island because when the water is high, it's basically underwater. When the water is low, it takes certain channels and leaves a dry spot in the middle. And when Barnum was given this piece of property, that really wasn't the entire island. It's pretty big. So, you know, it's kind of been confusing to trace the history of this property. But whenever Barnum came back to town, and he did quite often, and he had the time, he would hop in his carriage and he would tell the driver, take me to Ivy Island. Now, he couldn't drive down into the swamp, but he would have the driver take him to Walnut Hill Road, to that dirt road. And he said, you know, let me at least see it. And the driver would probably go a short ways down what was known as Ivy Lane, and Barnum could see his beloved Ivy Island. So it meant a lot to him. Some of the other, yes, go ahead. You are absolutely correct in everything that you said. He received it when he was 2. When you're 2, you don't know what's going on. He didn't even know he owned it until he was older. And when he was 12 years old, he was actually cutting hay on Walnut Hill Road. And he asked his grandfather, you know, isn't my piece of property around here somewhere? And he said, yeah, it's right beyond that tree line. And P.T. Barnum said, all right, when it's lunchtime, I'm going to go check it out. And he took with him an Irishman who was a hired hand. And he said, we're going to go find Ivy Island. Well, he went into the swamp and almost drowned. He was stung by bees. He was chased by snakes. And unfortunately, he found out that his grandfather had been playing a practical joke on him. And all the time he was growing up, he thought he was this big, wealthy landowner, and it was nothing but worthless swamp. But he used it to his advantage, because when he tried to buy this museum in New York, the people selling it said, well, Mr. Barnum, we'd like to cut this deal here, but when we look at your property, everything you own is mortgaged to the hilt. Is there anything you own free and clear? And Barnum was sweating bullets. And then he thought of Ivy Island. Oh, yes, I have a beautiful piece of land, 10 acres in my hometown of Bethel that was given to me by my grandfather. And they said, okay, that's good. That's good enough for us. You know, sign on the dotted line. And so, you know, the museum was kind of his stepping stone to the rest of his career. So he had a soft spot in his heart for Ivy Island. All right, again, I won't bore you to tears, but some of these other names, where the high school is today, everybody's heard of Grassy Plain. Very few people have heard of Grassy Ridge, but where the high school is today, where the 4-way intersection is, where Judd Avenue meets Route 58 and 302 in Milwaukee cross, that was the top of the grassy ridge. See anything else? Oh, where today's Chestnut Ridge Reservoir is. That was originally called Cripple Bush Swamp. And then it was changed to Wolf Swamp. And then when they went to make it into a reservoir, everybody said, do you want to be drinking water out of Wolf Swamp? Nah. And they changed it to Chestnut Ridge Reservoir. All right, we'll keep rolling. We're getting to the last part of the presentation. I wanted to point out to you that at one point in time, a number of state chartered turnpikes ran right through Bethel. Now today, when you think about turnpikes, I think of the New Jersey Turnpike, the New York Turnpike, the Massachusetts Turnpike. We think of these huge interstate highways. This was not that. These were simple roads, but they were designed to make transportation between two specific spots much easier and much faster. All right, a turnpike is a road that requires a toll payment for use. Following the creation of the federal government in 1789, there was a great desire for internal improvements that would help speed travel and commerce and thereby strengthen the nation's economy. At least 5 turnpike companies were granted charters by the Connecticut General Assembly to construct roads that pass through Bethel. Most of these incorporated sections of road already existing and unfortunately failed after a relatively short amount of time. So I've traced these turnpikes and I've given you the date of creation by the state assembly. Now, the Norwalk and Danbury Turnpike, that's easy to figure out. That's Route 53 today, 1795. Now that's when it was approved. I'm not saying that they put the shovel in the ground the same day the assembly gave the okay, but that's when the process was started. If you look at the purple line, that's showing something that was called the Fairfield, Weston, and Reading Turnpike. And that's basically, again, that's Sunset Hill Road to Putnam Park Road to Hoyts Hill Road. The West Middle Turnpike dates back to 1803. Now, this was important for us because this gave us most of what is today Plumtrees Road. And that went all the way up to Farmington and even beyond that to Hartford, but it was usually, the locals referred to it as the Farmington-Danbury Turnpike, even though its official name was the West Middle Turnpike. The Fairfield Turnpike is what gave us Shelley Road. If we're down here in Dodgingtown, this is Shelley Road. Then it connected with Old Holyville Road and continued on right out of town. And it was designed to go to the Four Corners in Brookfield. And then the last one is the one that is probably most familiar to people still to this day. The Sherman and Reading Turnpike was created in 1834. And that's this pink line running right through the center of Bethel. Now, because that one is still known by a good number of people, I wanted to just show you a clearer view of it. This is kind of an unusual map. This is a map that was done in 1960, but the people who created this map were very thorough. They said, we don't want to just show the roads that exist now. We want to show the old abandoned roads as well. So here, this is Putnam Park Road or Route 58. This is Route 302. So right here, this would be the intersection by Bethel High School. Well, look where the Sherman Turnpike went. It went right through the center of the David W. Deacon Educational Park. And I didn't realize until I started researching this, that back in high school, the cross-country course actually ran along that old abandoned portion of the Sherman Turnpike. And there was still a bridge that crossed a river that had the old wooden beams, and it may have gone all the way back to the days of the Sherman Turnpike. Now, after it branched off of Putnam Park Road, crossed over 302, went through the educational park, came out down here on Plumtrees Road, went over to Taylor Road, and then onto Shelter Rock Road. Then this is where it veers off of Payne Road and basically went through a swampy area. But you can see why so many of these roads failed, because people were like I am. They were cheap and they didn't want to pay these tolls. And when you got to this point right here, who's going to go down a turnpike road when you can take Payne Road that runs parallel to it? So some of these roads came to be known as shunpike roads because you were shunning the turnpike in order not to pay the toll. We still have this road today. It's a dead end called Turnpike Road off of Walnut Hill Road, but it acquired its name because it would take you to the old Sherman Turnpike. Now, again, just as the name implies, the road was taking you from Reading to Sherman or vice versa. Today, a northern part of the Sherman-Reading Turnpike is now beneath the waters of Candlewood Lake, which was created in 1928. Yes?
You said so the road, is that the access road that goes to the power line down by Field?
I haven't been down there in a long time, but if it's not that road, it was very close to it. It ran along the back portion of the educational park before you hit the backyards of people who live on Taylor Road. It was right down in that low area there. But again, when the educational park was expanded and more schools were built and more playing fields were built, a lot of that old Sherman Turnpike bit the dust. Now, if you want to see a part of the old Sherman-Reading Turnpike that still exists, you get on Route 6 and you head, that would be heading east, right? And before you come to Payne Road would be up here on the right-hand side, right here. This is still to this day, and I wanted to make sure you couldn't miss it. So let me just, there are two signs, not one, that say Old Sherman Turnpike, and another one here, Old Sherman Turnpike. That portion of the turnpike still survives. Much of it has disappeared. But it's kind of amazing that all of the trouble and all the expense that went into making this road, and it was really only an operation, on what was supposed to be a profit-making basis for about 5 years. All right, one last road. Thank you for hanging in there. This photo shows the area north of the entrance to McCower Park. So if you're driving along Shelter Rock Road, you've just passed the entrance to the park, or been right about here. Are you with me? And then you're heading towards Payne Road, or you could take a left and go down here again towards the Danbury Sewage Treatment Plant on your way to, let's say, the Berkshire Shopping Center. Well, on the right-hand side, this is where what is today called Turnpike Road once connected with Shelter Rock Road. This was cut off in 1956, and the story I've heard is it was just considered to be too dangerous, that people would come down this hill at too great a speed. They really couldn't stop in time, and they would sometimes slip out into the intersection and bad accidents would occur. So it was decided, no, we're going to get rid of it and we're going to cut it off. So it appears in city directories until 1956 and not after that time. This was part of not a turnpike, but just a major road. Even before turnpikes existed, this was a road that was in use before the American Revolution. And it was the main road between New York State and Hartford. It was called the Middle Road. And you started on Main Street in Danbury. You then went to South Street. You headed out towards the base of Shelter Rock Hill. You went over the top of Shelter Rock Hill Road. You came up here by McCower Park, and then you continued on up Jabez Hill. That was the name for it. And you eventually connected with Walnut Hill Road, which took you out to Newtown. And eventually you were making your way towards the northern part of Connecticut. And what I like to think about, and I've looked into this, and there's pretty good evidence to confirm this, George Washington traveled on this road on horseback on September 20th, 1780, on his way to meet with the French ally Count Rochambeau in Hartford. So if you can use your imagination and picture George Washington on horseback, taking a trip right through Bethel and going right up this abandoned road.
Got a question.
Yes,
What was, Payne Road was named, why? Was there a?
there was a family with the last name of Payne that was still living there in the 1930s. They ran a nursery, they grew trees. And then later, and some of you older folks might remember this, they moved their operation to Route 6. And they still retain the name Payne's Nursery. I don't know if you, but I remember that as a kid. But when you look on the map of Bethel in the 1930s, there's a house that would be on the right-hand side of the road as you're heading up towards Route 6. So that was a relatively recent name. Some of these names go way back. Some of these names are much newer.
Fairly new.
The name is, yes. The road is ancient. The road is before 1759, but the name Payne, 20th century. Okay, last one. Okay, hang on. And we've reached the end, and you can exit the road. Thanks for coming out tonight. Try to avoid the toll roads on your way home. And what I'd like to say is I hope you've enjoyed tonight's program. If you've said to yourself at least once, I didn't know that, then I will have done my job. And thank you all for your continued support. I know the library needs to close down. I gave you one little